The most dangerous man in the 9 territories was going to faint, and 300 people were about to watch it happen. Violin Dovenmark had never fainted in his life. He had walked off a spear through the thigh. He had stood in the ruin of Karth and not blinked. The nobles packed into the Hall of Moons had come tonight precisely because he was the man who did not flinch. The Alpha King whose stare made ambassadors forget their own names, whose name mothers used to steady unruly children into obedience. They had come to watch him bind himself, on the moon goddess's own command, to a woman none of them had ever seen, a stranger in a silver veil. And now, at the altar, in front of every noble house in Dovenmark, their unflinching king had gone the color of old ash. It happened the instant she lifted the veil. She did it herself. No attendant, no ceremony, just her own 2 hands, rising to the hem of silver gauze and drawing it back from her face. A small motion, the kind of thing no one should remember. And Violin, who had held a fortress line against a force 3 times his own, took one look at what was underneath and swayed on his feet. The great hall heard it before they understood it. The sharp scrape of his boot as his balance went, the gasp of the priestess beside him, the clatter of the ceremonial dagger slipping from his suddenly nerveless fingers and ringing against the marble. His hand shot out and found the edge of the altar stone, white-knuckled, gripping it like a man on the deck of a sinking ship. His broad shoulders, shoulders that had carried the weight of a kingdom without bending, curved inward as though something had struck him in the chest. For one heartbeat, the Alpha King of Dovenmark looked like he might go down. The hall stopped breathing. 300 faces froze in mid-expression. A duchess, with her wine halfway to her lips, a general who had followed Violin into 3 campaigns, staring as if the sky had cracked open. Orin, the king's beta, his oldest friend, the only man in the room permitted to touch him, took a single sharp step forward off the dais, one hand rising in alarm, and then stopped himself, because to catch the king in front of the assembled realm would be to announce to every enemy in the territories that the unbreakable man could break. Soraya stood at the center of it all, with the veil in her hands and no idea what she had done. She saw only his face, this enormous, striking, terrifying stranger she had been given to, draining of all its color as he stared at her, like she was a ghost risen out of the floor. She saw his lips part. She saw them shape a word without sound. It was not her name. She did not have a name he could know. They had met 4 minutes ago. It was some other word, some word from somewhere far away and long ago, and whatever it was, it had reached into the strongest man she had ever seen and pulled the ground out from under him. What is wrong with him? She thought wildly. What did I do? I only showed him my face. She would replay this moment for a long time afterward. The silver veil warm in her fists, the 10,000 candles of the Hall of Moons swimming in his stunned gray eyes, the terrible, held silence of 300 people waiting to see whether their king would fall. She would replay it and understand none of it, because no one had told her the truth. No one had told her what her face meant. No one had told her why the moon goddess, who had not spoken to a living wolf in 200 years, had come down into the dreams of the most powerful man alive, and commanded him, an Alpha King who bowed to nothing, to find this exact face and marry it before the next full moon or watch his kingdom fall into the dark. They had told her only to be quiet, to be grateful, and to keep the veil down until the vows were spoken. She had lifted it 3 words early. Violin dragged in a breath through his teeth. By some enormous act of will, she could physically feel, across the space between them, he forced himself upright. The color did not come back to his face. His hand did not leave the altar. But he straightened his spine, one vertebra at a time, and he made himself look at her, really look, the way a man looks at a wound to decide how badly he is going to bleed. "Leave us," he said. His voice was wrecked. It came out low and cracked, and it carried to every corner of the silent hall. The priestess faltered, "Your Majesty, the right is not. Leave us," louder now. The alpha in it rolled through the room like a struck bell, and 300 nobles rose in a rustle of silk and unease, and began in stunned, murmuring waves to file out, glancing back over their shoulders at the sight none of them had ever thought to see. Their king, gray-faced and gripping the stone, and the veiled stranger, who had done it to him without lifting anything but her own 2 hands. Orin was the last to move. He caught Soraya's eye as he passed, a fast, unreadable look, equal parts warning, and something that might have been pity, and then the great doors of the Hall of Moons boomed shut, and Soraya was alone with the man whose knees she had just, somehow, nearly buckled. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The candles hissed. Somewhere high in the rafters a nightbird shifted. "Say something," Soraya whispered, because she could not bear it. "Please." "Whatever I did. How old are you?" It was not a question. It was a demand, ground out through a clenched jaw. 22. Something moved behind his eyes. Some calculation, some door slamming shut, some worse door opening. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was looking at the marked skin at the corner of her left eye, the pale silver crescent she had been born with, and had spent her whole life hiding under powder and shadow. The mark the priestess had made her wash clean that morning. The mark he was staring at now, like it was a blade held to his throat. "Do you know what that is?" he said quietly. "A birthmark," Soraya said. "It's only a birthmark, my lord." "It is not," said the Alpha King of Dovenmark. "A birthmark." And that was the last thing either of them said that night, because to say more would be to begin. And neither of them was ready to begin. But it had already begun. It had begun the moment the goddess opened her mouth in the dark of his dreams, 3 weeks ago. And to understand any of it, the feint, the veil, the word he could not say aloud, we have to go back to the night the strongest man in the 9 territories was brought to his knees by a voice only he could hear. 3 weeks earlier, Vilen Dovenmark had not slept a full night, in longer than he cared to count, and he told himself, as he told everyone, that it was simply the work. A kingdom did not rule itself, and a kingdom that had clawed its way out of the Karth War only 4 years ago ruled itself least of all. There were grain tallies and border reports, and a Western duke who thought a king distracted by reconstruction might not notice a few missing tax barges. Vilen noticed everything. That was the whole of his reputation, and most of the truth of him. He noticed everything, forgot nothing, and forgave very little, least of all himself. The work was the story he gave the court for the shadows under his eyes. It was not the true reason, and the true reason was the one thing in all the world he would not say aloud. So, when the dream came, he assumed at first it was only exhaustion. He was standing in a field of pale grass, under a moon far too large, and the grass was silver and the moon was silver, and the woman standing in the middle of it was made of the same cold light. He knew what she was before she spoke. Every wolf did. Her face was the moon's face. You could not look at it directly, any more than you could stare at the sun. Calith, the moon goddess, the mother of every wolf that had ever run beneath her light. She had not walked in a living dream in 200 years, and now she was standing in his, and she was looking at him with an expression he could not name, because gods do not wear expressions. A man is built to read. "Viane," she said, and her voice was the sound of tide under ice. "Son of Dovenmark, the dark is coming for your people, and you cannot stop it alone. You were never meant to." He was not a man who knelt. He knelt. "Tell me what to do," he said, "and it is done." He would remember, later, how easily he had said it, how certain he had been that, whatever the goddess asked, he could give. A war, a wall, his own strength. He had spent his life, paying for his kingdom, in exactly those currencies. He had not imagined she would ask for something he did not know how to give. "There is a face," Calith said. "It carries my mark, a crescent, silver, at the corner of the left eye. You will know it the instant you see it, because you have seen it before, in the place you do not let yourself go." the goddess's light dimmed, and for a moment the enormous moon behind her guttered, like a candle in wind, and Violin felt a cold he had not felt since the war. Find that face. Wed it before my next full self rises whole in the sky. Bind your line to hers, and the dark will break upon that bond and scatter. Fail, and Dovenmark falls, and every soul in it, and it will be your doing, as the last one was, as the last one was. He came awake with those 4 words in his mouth, and his heart slamming against his ribs, and for the first time in his adult life, the taste of pure animal fear on his tongue. Because the goddess had reached into the one room in himself he kept locked, the room he did not open, even alone, even weary, past speech, and she had told him she knew what was in it. And she had told him the price of failing again would be the same as the price of failing the first time. He did not sleep the rest of that night either. But now it was not the grain tallies keeping him awake. Owen found him at dawn on the training ground, driving a practice blade into a straw man with a mechanical, joyless rhythm that told the beta everything he needed to know before a single word passed between them. "You look," Owen said, leaning against the fence rail with the ease of a man who had known the king since they were both grubby pups scrapping over the same bone, like a corpse that has decided to keep moving out of spite. "Caliph came to me." Violin did not stop swinging. "In a dream. A true one." The rail creaked as Oren slowly straightened. In 20 years, he had heard the king make exactly one joke, and it had been an accident, and it had unsettled them both. This was not that. "Say that again." "The moon goddess," Violin said, and buried the blade a hand's width into the straw man's shoulder, "has ordered me to marry a stranger. A woman I have never met, whose face carries her mark. Before the next full moon, or Dovenmark falls." He pulled the blade free. "So we are going to find her. Every marked woman in the 9 territories. I want them found and brought to the capital, and I want it done in 3 weeks, because that is all the time the goddess has given me, and I do not intend to be the king who ignored a god and lost a kingdom for his pride." Oren was quiet for a moment. He was watching his friend's face, and he was seeing, under the strain and the exhaustion, something he had not seen on Violin since the last night of the war, the night neither of them ever spoke of. "There's something you're not telling me," Oren said carefully. "You faced worse odds than a wedding, Violin. You look like she asked you to cut off your own arm. For one moment, one only." Violin almost told him. The word almost came up out of the locked room. She said, "I have seen the face before. In the place I do not let myself go." She said, as the last one was. But the room had a door for a reason, and the king shut it, the way he had shut it 10,000 times, and turned it into iron the way he was good at. "Just find her," Violin said. And so the search began, the strangest royal decree Dovenmark had heard in living memory. Riders went out to every province with the same impossible instruction: find women bearing a silver crescent at the corner of the left eye. Bring them, unharmed, honored, to the capital. The Alpha King would choose a bride from among them. What none of the riders knew, what Violin himself did not yet understand, though the dread of it sat in him like a swallowed stone, was that there was only ever going to be one. The goddess had not offered him a choice. She had offered him a recognition, and 200 miles to the south, in a mill town on the Grey River Marne, a woman who had spent her entire life powdering over the mark at the corner of her eye was about to be found. Soraya had learned to hide the mark before she had learned to read. Her earliest memory was of her mother's thumb, rough with millflour, pressing pale powder into the corner of her eye, and her mother's voice, low and urgent. "Never let them see it, little bird. Marked ones get taken. Marked ones don't come back." She had never known exactly what the warning meant. Her mother died of the gray lung when Soraya was 9 and took the rest of the explanation with her, but the habit had outlived the woman who gave it. Every morning of her life, before anything else, Soraya reached for the powder. She did it without thinking, the way other people breathed. She was, by every measure the town of Halden used, a nobody. She kept the accounts for the miller because she had a head for numbers, and no family to marry her off. She lived in a room over the grain store. She was clever and quick-tongued, and entirely too fond of saying the true thing at the wrong moment, which had kept her poor and unmarried, and she privately felt considerably more entertained than her neighbors. She had made her peace with a small life. She had a window that caught the morning, a cat that tolerated her, and a river that never stopped talking. It was enough. She had taught herself it was enough, which is a different thing from it being enough, but she did not examine the difference too closely. Then the king's riders came to Halden. They came at midday, 6 of them, road-dusted and grim, and they read the decree in the market square while the whole town gathered to gape. The Alpha King sought women bearing a silver crescent at the corner of the left eye. Any who bore the mark, or knew one who did, were to come forward, by the king's word and the goddess's will. Soraya, standing at the back with a sack of flour on her hip, felt the powder at the corner of her eye like it had suddenly caught fire. Marked ones get taken, marked ones don't come back. She turned to go. She got 4 steps. You, a rider's voice, cutting through the crowd. She had been careful. She was always careful, but the noon sun was high and merciless, and it had found the one flaw in the morning's powder, a place where the heat had thinned it, and the rider had the eyes of a man trained to look for exactly one thing. Girl with the flower. Turn around. She thought about running. She was fast. But there were 6 of them, and they had horses, and the whole town was watching. And some deep, tired, honest part of her was so exhausted from a lifetime of hiding that when the moment came, it simply put down the sack of flour. She turned around, she looked the rider in the eye, and she reached up with a defiance that surprised even her and wiped the powder away herself. The silver crescent caught the light. The rider went very still. "Fetch the captain," he said to the man beside him, not looking away from her. And then, to Soraya, in a voice that had gone strangely gentle, the way people go gentle around the very ill, or the very fragile. "You'll want to bring your things, mistress. You won't be coming back to Halden." They treated her, from that moment, with a bewildering, unnerving courtesy. She had braced for chains. Instead, she got a wagon with a cushioned seat and a fur against the river, cold, and a young rider named Petch, who blushed every time she spoke to him and would not, no matter how she wheedled, tell her what any of it meant. "The king will explain." "Mistress, it's not my place." She got fed better on the road than she had eaten in her life. She got looked at, constantly, sidelong, with an expression she slowly came to recognize and could not stand, because it was awe. And awe was a thing that happened to holy relics and prize horses, not to the girl who kept the miller's accounts. "I'm not anything," she told Petch on the 3rd night, frustrated past bearing, warming her hands at the fire. "You understand that? I add up sacks of grain for a living. Whatever you all think this mark means, you've got the wrong girl. I'm nobody." Petch looked at her across the fire with his earnest, blushing face, and for once he did not deflect. "With respect, mistress," he said quietly. "The goddess doesn't send the king dreams about nobody." It was the first she had heard of a dream, or the goddess, or the king dreaming of anyone at all. She lay awake a long time that night, under the borrowed furs, watching the sparks go up into the enormous southern dark, and turn the words over and over. The goddess doesn't send the king dreams about nobody. For the first time in her life, the mark at the corner of her eye did not feel like a thing to be ashamed of. It felt like a question she had never been allowed to ask. And underneath the fear, underneath the grief for her small, safe life and her window and her cat, all left behind in Halden, she felt something she was almost ashamed of, something she would not have admitted to Petch or anyone. A thin, treacherous thread of hope that she might, after 22 years of being nobody, turn out to be someone. that there might be a reason she had always had to hide. She had no way of knowing that the reason was the last thing she would have imagined, and that the man who was going to tell her it was the last thing she would have imagined was at that very moment, 200 miles north, not sleeping, and dreading her arrival more than he had dreaded anything in his life. There were, in the end, 9 of them. 9 women bearing something that could be called a silver crescent, gathered from across the 9 territories over 3 frantic weeks, and housed in the east wing of the palace under the fluttering care of a dozen attendants. Soraya met them the night she arrived, a duke's pale, nervous daughter, a fisherwoman with a laugh like a gull, a temple girl who prayed at all hours, and others, each of them marked, each of them summoned, each of them wondering the same thing Soraya was: why me, and what happens to the 8 who aren't chosen? But Soraya noticed something. The others were too frightened to notice. She noticed that the attendants, when they thought no one was looking, only ever looked closely at her. She noticed that the crescents on the other 8 were faint, or the wrong shape, or on the wrong side. She noticed that hers alone was a clean, sharp, silver crescent at the corner of the left eye, exactly, precisely, as the decree had specified, as though the decree had been written after looking at her face. And she noticed, on the second day, an old woman watching her from a doorway, not an attendant. Someone older, sharper, with clever gray eyes and healer's stains on her fingers, who looked at Soraya's mark, not with awe, but with something far more unsettling, with recognition, and then with a flash of something that looked impossibly like grief. "You're the one," the old woman said. It was not a question. "The one what?" Soraya asked. But the old woman, Marest, though Soraya did not yet know her name, only shook her head slowly and murmured something Soraya would not understand until it was far too late to unknow it. "Gods forgive him," Marist said softly. "He's going to marry the face. He's going to marry the poor child the face belongs to, and it will nearly undo them both." And she withdrew into the dark of the corridor before Soraya could demand to know what in the moon's name that meant, leaving her alone with the 8 other marked women and the first cold, peeping certainty that whatever waited for her here was not the answer to her question. It was a worse question. The choosing took less than a minute, and Soraya was not in the room for most of it. They lined the 9 of them up in an antechamber the next morning, scrubbed and gowned and terrified, and one by one a steward took them through a curtained door, and one by one they came back out, some relieved, some weeping, all of them dismissed. Soraya went last. She never saw the king. She was taken through the curtain into a small stone room and told to stand on a particular mark on the floor, and a voice behind a screen, not the steward's, someone else's, someone whose voice was low and rough and did something strange to the air in the room, said only 2 words, that one, and then a sound she would think about for a long time. Afterward, the sound of a large man sitting down very suddenly, as though his legs had stopped agreeing to hold him. A scrape of a chair. A sharp, indrawn breath, quickly mastered. "Your Majesty," the steward began. "That one," the voice said again, steadier now. Iron poured over something that had cracked. "The rest may go home with the crown's thanks and a purse each. Her, we keep. Prepare the rite for the full moon." Soraya stood on her mark and stared at the screen and felt the whole shape of her life bend, permanently, in a direction she had not chosen. She wanted to say something. She always wanted to say something. It was her worst habit, and for once, faced with the screen and the rough voice and the man behind it who had gone down into a chair at the sight of her, she found she had nothing at all. She was led back out. The wedding was in 4 days. She did not see him again until the altar. They gave her rooms fit for a queen and a fear fit for a prisoner. Attendants poured in and out with silks and slippers and instructions. "Do not speak to His Majesty unless spoken to. Do not touch His Majesty without leave. Keep the veil down until the vows are spoken. This is the goddess's own right, and the order of it must not be broken." Soraya absorbed perhaps a third of it. The rest of her attention was fixed obsessively on a single question no one would answer. Why did he sit down when he heard that one? What is it about my face? They went pale and would not say. She asked the sweet, blushing rider Petch, who had ridden the whole way north with her escort, and, unwilling to abandon the one person in the capital he'd promised to see safely delivered, had asked to be posted to the palace guard so a familiar face would be near her, and even Petch, earnest, hopeless at secrets Petch, only shook his head miserably and said, "I don't know, mistress, but there's talk. There's old talk. About the king, and the war, and someone he—" And then an officer walked past and Petch shut his mouth like a trap and would not open it again. There's old talk. About the king, and the war, and someone, she lay awake with that unfinished sentence the way she had lain awake with the goddess, doesn't send dreams about nobody. Except this one did not feel like hope. This one felt like the shadow of a shape she could almost see. On the third night, she found Marest. Or rather, Marest found her, the old healer with the gray eyes, slipping into Soraya's rooms after the attendants had gone, carrying a cup of something that smelled of chamomile and honey and underneath, something bitter Soraya couldn't place. "You're not sleeping," Marist said. It was not a question. The old woman did not seem to deal in questions. "I can tell. You have the look. Drink, not until you tell me what you meant." Soraya did not take the cup. "In the corridor, you said he's going to marry the face. You said it will nearly undo them both. I've been carrying that around for 3 days like a stone in my shoe. What face? Whose face? Why does everyone in this palace look at me like I'm a ghost?" Marist studied her for a long moment. Whatever she saw seemed to decide something. "Sit," the old woman said, "and I'll tell you what I can, which is less than you want and more than I'm allowed." She set the cup down. She folded her stained hands. "You know the king went to war, before he was king, against the Karth pack in the mountains. You know he won. Everyone knows he won. It's why he wears the crown." Her voice dropped. "What most don't know is what the winning cost him. There was someone at the end of the war. A young woman named Ilsa, a healer's girl, as it happens, who wore a little silver mark at the corner of her eye, same as you. Someone he tried to protect and couldn't, someone whose face he has never once managed to put down. And you, child, I have her face," Soraya said. The words came out of her flat and cold and certain, and the moment she said them she knew they were true, and she felt the floor of her life drop away entirely. "That's it, isn't it? That's why he sat down. That's why the attendants go gray. I have the face of the person he lost. Mark and all." Marist's silence was answer enough. "But that's—" Soraya was on her feet now, her heart going like a hammer. "That's a cruel thing to ask of anyone. The goddess ordered him to marry the face of the person he couldn't save? To look at it every day for the rest of his life? What kind of god does that? What kind of—" "I don't know," Marist said. And for the first time, the old woman's composure cracked, and underneath it was something old and sad and afraid. "I've served the goddess 60 years, and I don't understand this. There's a purpose in it. There's always a purpose in what she does. But I can't see the shape of it, and that frightens me more than not believing at all." She rose and pressed the cup into Soraya's numb hands. "Drink this. Sleep if you can. And child," she paused at the door, "when you lift that veil, whatever you do, lift it slow. Give him time to remember it's not her. Give him time to see it's you." But no one had told Soraya to lift it slow. No one had told her the veil order existed because of this, because the rite was built around a man's need to survive the sight of a lost face on a living woman. She had heard, "Only keep it down until the vows are spoken." And 4 nights later, standing at the altar in the Hall of Moons, with 300 nobles watching, and the enormous terrifying stranger she'd married looming over her, and her own heart pounding out of her chest, she got the order wrong by 3 words. She lifted the veil early, she lifted it fast. And the strongest man in the 9 territories took one look at the face he had spent 4 years failing to put down alive, and breathing, and looking back at him, and the ground went out from under him in front of his entire kingdom. They did not speak for 2 days after the altar. Soraya was moved into the queen's apartments, an absurd suite of rooms larger than the entire mill she'd grown up beside, and left there, honored and fed and utterly alone, while somewhere in the vast cold palace, her husband avoided her with the discipline of a man avoiding a wound. She learned the shape of him only through the things he left in his wake. A guard doubled at her door, a standing order that she be given anything she asked for. And, on the second morning, a thing that made her stand very still in the middle of the room for a long moment. A small potted river reed, on her windowsill, the exact gray-green of the plants that grew along the Marne, brought 200 miles by someone who had asked, quietly, what the woman from the south might miss. She had told no one she missed the river. She had mentioned it once, to Petch, on the road. He asked. She thought he nearly fainted at the sight of me, and won't come within a corridor of me, and he asked what I'd miss. When they finally did meet again, it was an accident, and it went badly. She had gone looking for the healer's stores. Marist had said she might come by for chamomile, and Soraya, going quietly stir-mad, had decided to go herself. She got lost in the palace's gray stone arteries, and turned a corner, and there he was, Valen, filling a doorway with a report in his hand. And they both froze, like two animals that had blundered into each other. Up close, in daylight, without 300 people watching, he was somehow worse and better at once. Worse because the sheer size of him crowded the air out of the hall. Better because she could see. Now, the thing the veil moment and the screen had hidden from her, the exhaustion carved deep beneath his eyes. The way he held himself, like a man braced against a blow that had already landed. "You're not supposed to be in this wing," he said. It came out harsh. She watched him hear how harsh it was, and not know how to take it back. "No one gave me a map," Soraya said. "They gave me a river reed and a locked husband. I'm working with limited information." Something flinched across his face at River Reed. She'd meant to thank him, and it had come out as a jab, the way things did with her. And for one awful second, she thought she'd broken whatever fragile thing had made him send it. Then his gaze caught, helplessly, on the mark at the corner of her eye, and she watched him go somewhere else entirely. Watched the present drop out from under him, and something 4 years old rise up to take its place. "You keep doing that," she said quietly, before she could stop herself. "Looking at me and seeing someone who isn't here." The report crumpled slightly in his grip. "You don't know what you're talking about," Violen said. "Then tell me." "Because I'm going to be looking at your face across a breakfast table for the rest of my life, and I'd like to know whose face you're going to be seeing across from you." Her voice cracked on the last of it, and she hated that it cracked, and she saw him hear that too. "I didn't ask for this. Neither did you. But I'm the one who has to be a ghost in my own marriage, and I never even met the woman I'm supposed to be haunting." For a long moment, he said nothing. The torches guttered. Somewhere a door closed. "Her name was Ilsa," he said. It was the first true thing he had given her, and it cost him visibly. She saw the word come up out of some locked place and scrape him raw on the way out. He did not explain who Ilse was. He did not have to. Soraya already knew the shape of it from Marest, and the rest she could read in the way his jaw worked around the 2 syllables. "Thank you," Soraya said, gentler now, "for telling me. And for the read." She hesitated. "I did mean to thank you for the read. I'm bad at it. Thanking people. I say the barb thing first and the kind thing second, and by then everyone's already flinched." The smallest thing happened at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, the distant rumor of one, quickly suppressed. But she caught it, and something in her chest turned over. "Go back to your wing," Violen said. But there was no iron in it now. "You'll get lost in the lower vaults, and I'll have to send half the guard to find you. And then the Western Duke will hear the Queen wandered off in her second week, and decide the crown's gone soft. The Queen." Soraya repeated, testing the word like a stone in her mouth. That's me. That's a horrifying development. And the Alpha King of Devonmark, exhausted and haunted, and standing in a cold stone hall in front of the living face of the person he had failed, made a sound she had not expected, and clearly had not planned. A short, rough, startled breath that was very nearly a laugh. He looked as astonished by it as she was. Then he was gone, striding off down the corridor with his crumpled report, and Soraya stood alone in the torchlight with her heart doing something complicated, and a small, dangerous thought taking root. He is not what they told me he was. The dreams began that night. She would not understand for a long time that they were not only dreams. She only knew that she fell asleep in the enormous cold queen's bed and woke, without waking, somewhere else. A field of pale grass under a moon too large, silver light. And in the distance, small and alone in all that emptiness, a figure she knew by the set of his shoulders even from far away. She started toward him. The grass made no sound. Violin, she called, and the name vanished into the silver air. He did not turn. He was staring at something in the dark beyond the field's edge, something she could not see, and even from here she could feel it pouring off him, in waves. A grief so vast and so old, it had its own weather. She woke before she reached him, gasping, the queen's bed cold around her and the river reed a black shape against the moonlit window. She told herself it was nerves, a strange bed, a stranger husband, a mind chewing on Marest's story. She told herself that for exactly one more day, until the morning, she mentioned it, carefully, casually, over the first breakfast they had ever shared, and watched every drop of color drain out of Violin's face for the second time since she'd met him. A field, he said very quietly, setting down his cup with a hand that was not quite steady. Silver grass. A moon, too large. Soraya went still. You've been there, Soraya. He said her name for the first time, and it stopped her heart, and it was not gentle, it was afraid. Listen to me very carefully. That is not a dream. And you must never ever walk toward me in it again. He would not explain it at breakfast. He stood abruptly and left, the second time he had fled a room she was in, and Soraya was learning that this was simply what Violin did when a thing came too close to the locked room inside him. He removed his body from the vicinity of the question. But she was also learning that he came back. That was the new and dangerous thing. He always eventually came back. He came back that evening, to the door of the Queen's apartments, and knocked like a man who had argued with himself the whole way there and lost. Walk with me, he said. There are things I have to tell you, and I can't tell them sitting still. So they walked through the moon garden behind the palace, where pale night flowers opened to the dark. Two guards trailing at a discreet and fascinated distance, and Valen told her about the goddess, the dream 3 weeks before the wedding, the order, the mark, the full moon, and the price of failing. He told it plainly, a soldier's report, and Soraya listened and felt the last of her small, safe life in Halden fall away for good, because there was no going back to being the miller's accountant. Once a god had built a wedding around your face. So I'm not a wife, she said slowly when he'd finished. Not really. I'm a lock. A key. The goddess needed a face and a mark and a bond, and I happened to be born wearing the right one. No. Violence stopped on the path. In the moonlight, the exhaustion under his eyes was silver-shadowed, and he looked, for once, not like a king or a warlord, but simply like a very tired man. That's what I told myself too, that you were a task, a thing the goddess required. It was easier. He looked at her, and made himself keep looking, mark and all. It stopped being easy the day I sent for the river reed. Soraya's breath caught. But the field, she said, because if she let that sit, she was going to do something reckless. You said it's not a dream. What is it? And so, in the moon garden, under Kayla's own light, Violin told her the second secret, the one even Orin only half knew. When the Karth settlement fell, he said, Their alpha was gone, and their fighters were broken, and I thought the worst of it was behind us. But there was an old woman among them, a bloodspeaker. She had lost everything I had taken, and she knelt in the ruin of her pack, and she cursed me with the last of her strength. Spoke it through cracked and failing breath. Every night the dead will find you, every night you will stand among them, and you will not rest until you lie down among them, for good. His jaw tightened. Then she was gone. And I did not think much of it, because the defeated curse the conqueror in every war ever fought, and the curses never come to anything. But this one did, Soraya said. That night I closed my eyes, and I was in the field. And I have been in the field every night since. 4 years. He said it flatly, the way he said everything that cost him most. There is something at its edge, in the dark beyond the silver grass, a presence, patient and vast and hungry, and it wears, when it chooses to show itself, the face of every person I failed. It calls to me. It tells me things in a voice that is almost kind, which is the worst part, because everything it says I already believe. You could have saved them. You should have seen it coming. A better king would have come to the edge. Come into the dark. You know you belong here. 4 years, Soraya breathed. Every night, 4 years, I've stood in that field and refused to walk to the edge. And every night, and every morning I'm a little more tired. A grim, exhausted, almost smile. The court thinks I'm iron. The truth is, I'm just a man who hasn't slept a whole night since the mountains, holding a line against something that lives in his own head, because the witch was clever enough to make me the keeper of my own prison. That's why the goddess sent me, Soraya said, understanding crashing over her. She sent me to that field. I've been walking toward you in it, which you will now stop doing. The iron came back into him, but it was fear-shaped iron. Soraya, that thing has spent 4 years trying to pull me into the dark, and I'm an alpha king, and I can barely hold it off. If it gets its claws into you, if it decides your face is another thing it can use against me. He stopped. His hands had curled into fists. I will not lose that face to the dark twice. Do you understand me? I would rather stand in that field alone, for the rest of my life. And there it was, the whole tragic shape of him, laid bare in a sentence. Soraya looked at this enormous, frightened, self-condemned man, who sent for river reeds and fled from breakfast tables, and would rather suffer forever alone than risk her, and she felt the last of her resistance to him, quietly, catastrophically, give way. Well, that's a terrible plan, she said, because she could not say the other thing. Standing in a haunted field alone forever, do you know what that plan needs? Literally anyone else, standing in the field. Soraya, you've been holding a line by yourself for 4 years, and it's closer every night. You said so. That's not a line holding, Valen. That's a line losing. Slowly, she stepped in front of him on the path, close enough now that she had to tip her head back to hold his eyes. I don't know why the goddess gave me this face. Maybe it's cruel. Maybe it's a kindness dressed up as cruel. But I know she sent me into that field, and I know I'm the only living thing that's ever walked toward you in it, instead of away. So you can order me to stay out of it. You can double my guard and lock my door. But I'm going to fall asleep tonight, and I'm going to walk toward you anyway, because I am extremely stubborn. And the warning came with the woman. You married me anyway. For a long moment, Valen simply stared at her, this small, ferocious, impossible woman with a lost woman's face and nothing at all of a lost woman in her, and something in his ruined, exhausted expression cracked open into something perilously like hope. You are, he said slowly, the single most infuriating gift a god has ever given anyone. There it is, Soraya said. That's practically a love poem from you. That night, she fell asleep in the queen's bed, with the river reed on the sill, and she went to the field. And she walked toward him across the silent silver grass, and this time, for the first time, he did not tell her to go. This time, in the field between waking and the dark, The Alpha King of Dovenmark reached out and took her hand, and the presence at the edge of the field, the patient, hungry thing that had worn the face of the lost for 4 years, went very, very still, the way a predator goes still when the shape of the hunt has suddenly, unexpectedly changed. For 11 nights, it was almost happiness. That was the cruel arithmetic of it. Soraya would think later that the best days of her life and the beginning of the worst were the same days. In the waking world, a rhythm formed, unspoken, and precious. They took breakfast together, and he stopped fleeing the table. They walked the moon garden at night, and he learned that she talked when she was nervous, and she learned that he listened to all of it, every word, and returned it days later to prove he had. She told him about Halden, the river, the cat, her mother's flower-rough thumb. He told her, in pieces, small ones, about the boy he'd been before the war, made him iron. He laughed 3 more times, she counted them. She was keeping, she realized with alarm, a private ledger of Violin Dovenmark's laughs, the way she'd once kept the miller's accounts. And the total was becoming the most important number in her life. And every night they went to the field together, and held the line together, and it was working. The presence at the edge did not come closer. Some nights it did not come at all. Violin began, for the first time in 4 years, to wake rested, and the whole palace felt the change in him, the softening at the edges of the man they thought was solid iron, and the whispers began. The queen, the southern girl, whatever she's doing, look at him, look at the king. Marist saw it too, and Marist alone did not smile. It's working too well, the old healer said, cornering Soraya in the still room on the 11th day, her clever gray eyes troubled. I've been turning this over since the day you arrived, child, and something in it will not sit right. A blood speaker's curse is a spiteful thing. But it is a small thing. It should have thinned years ago, worn down like a knife edge on stone. This one hasn't. 4 years, and it's grown stronger, not weaker. Curses don't do that on their own. Something's been feeding it. She gripped Soraya's wrist. And now you've made yourself a shield between him and it. But have you asked yourself what happens to the shield when the thing finally stops being patient? It can't reach him through you. So sooner or later it's going to reach for you. Soraya had asked herself exactly that, every night, in the dark. She had simply decided not to answer. Then it reaches for me, she said. And he pulls me back the way I pull him back. That's the whole point of 2 people in a field, instead of 1. Marist's grip tightened. And if it's cleverer than that? If it knows the fastest way to break a man who won't break for his own sake is to break him for someone else's? The old woman's voice dropped to almost nothing. He would rather stand in that field alone forever than watch it take you. You told me so yourself. So what do you think he'll do? The moment that thing lays a hand on you, Soraya opened her mouth, closed it, and felt, for the first time, genuinely afraid. She should have listened. She would spend a long time wishing she had listened. It happened on the 12th night, and it happened exactly the way Marist had feared. They were in the field, hands clasped, the silver grass still around them, and it was a good night, the presence distant, the dark quiet. And Soraya had just turned to say something to him, some small, barbed, tender thing, when the ground beneath her feet went wrong. Soft, yielding, wet. She looked down and the silver grass was gone and there was black water rising around her ankles, her shins, cold as the gray river Marne in winter. And she had not walked toward the edge. She was certain she had not moved, but the edge had come to her. Violin. She grabbed for his hand and it was still there, his fingers locked around hers. But the water was at her knees now, and climbing, and something beneath it had wrapped around her ankle, patient and strong, and begun, without hurry, to pull. She heard him call her name, ragged and desperate. She saw his face, and it was the face from the altar, the face, draining of all its color, the man watching the impossible happen twice. And she understood, in the frozen instant before everything went wrong, exactly what Marest had tried to tell her. The thing at the edge of the field had never truly wanted Violin to walk into the dark on his own. It had spent 4 years learning that he would hold that line forever out of sheer stubborn self-punishment. But it had watched these 12 nights, and it had learned something new about him. It had learned there was now one thing in all the worlds that Valen Dovenmark would break his own line to save. And it had just wrapped that thing's ankle in black water and started to pull. "Let go of me," Soraya said, even as she gripped his hand harder, even as the water reached her waist. "Valen, listen. It's using me. It wants you to come after me. That's the whole trap. You have to let no." One word, absolute, and he was already moving. Already wading into the black water after her, already doing the one thing 4 years of a hungry curse had never been able to make him do. He was leaving the line. He was walking to the edge. Tea. For her. "No," she cried. "That's what it wants. Valen. That's exactly what it." The dark rose up around them both like a closing mouth. And Soraya woke, wrenched upright in the cold queen's bed, gasping, her ankle aching where nothing had touched it, and she knew, with a certainty that stopped her heart, before she even reached his chambers, before she even heard the shouting, before Orin met her white-faced in the corridor with the worst news she had ever received. Violin had not woken up. The Alpha King of Dovenmark lay in his bed, breathing unharmed, eyes closed, and could not, be roused. He had followed her into the dark, and the dark had kept him. They could not wake him, and they could not hide it. That was the thing Orin kept coming back to, pacing the king's chambers like a caged wolf, while the healers hovered uselessly around the bed. The Alpha King had gone down in his sleep, and would not rise, and a king who does not rise for a day is a rumor, and a king who does not rise for 2 is a war. The Western Duke's watchers were already in the walls. If Dovenmark's enemies learned the throne lay unconscious and undefended, the border would be alight before the full moon. The very full moon the goddess had set as her deadline, now only 1 night away. "We say he's in seclusion," Orin decided, gray with exhaustion. "Kings do strange things before holy nights. Let them believe it's piety." He rounded on Soraya. "But that buys us a day. 1. If he hasn't woken by the time that moon comes up whole tomorrow night." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Soraya had not left the chair beside the bed since they'd carried her in there at dawn. She sat with Valen's enormous slack hand in both of hers, and watched his chest rise and fall, steady, deep, the peaceful breathing of a man having a good dream, which was the cruelest part, because she knew exactly where that peaceful-looking body was, and what was standing at the edge of it in the dark. Her voice came out flat and scraped raw. "It couldn't pull him into the dark for 4 years. 12 nights with me, and it walked him right in. I was supposed to be the shield. I was the bait. Stop that." Marest, from the doorway, sharp as a slap. The old healer crossed the room and took Soraya's chin in her stained fingers and made her look up. "You listen to me, child. That thing did not take him because he loved him. It took him because for 4 years he decided all on his own, in the privacy of his own guilty heart, that he deserved to be taken. You didn't open that door. He's been standing in front of it half open since the mountains. You just gave the dark something worth reaching for." Her grip gentled. "Which means you're also the only thing that might be worth him climbing back out for. Do you understand the difference? It matters. It's going to matter more than anything before this is done." Soraya didn't answer. She was looking at his face. The exhaustion finally smoothed out of it, 4 years of it, gone slack in the worst possible sleep. And she was thinking about a sentence he'd said in the moon garden, and she'd been too busy falling in love to properly hear. "I would rather stand in that field alone for the rest of my life." He'd meant it. That was the thing. It hadn't been a lover's exaggeration. He had genuinely, calmly, decided that a lifetime of torment was the correct price for whatever had happened at the end of the war, and he had been paying it, willingly, every single night, for 4 years. And the curse had never had to work very hard at all, because the man it haunted agreed with it. Marist, she said slowly. You said this curse should have thinned years ago, that a bloodspeaker's spite is a small thing, and small things wear down. But this one grew. You said something had to be feeding it. The old woman went very still. I did. So it isn't the witch keeping it alive. Not really. She lit it 4 years ago and then she was gone. A small curse. A spiteful one. Exactly like you said. Soraya felt the shape of it assembling in the dark. Terrible and simple. It's him. The curse doesn't feed on his sleep. It feeds on his guilt. And he's got 4 years of it, and he keeps making more, every night, because he thinks he's supposed to. The witch didn't need the strength to build a torment that lasts. She just had to crack him open and let his own guilt do the building. Marist lowered herself slowly into the opposite chair, looking at Soraya as though seeing her clearly for the first time. 60 years I've served the goddess, she said quietly, and a Milltown accountant works it out in an afternoon. A breath. Yes. I think that's exactly it. And I think it's why Caliph needed you. Not the face, not the mark. You. Someone who could go into that field and refuse to agree with him. He stood at the foot of the bed now looking down at the man he'd known since they were pups, and when he spoke, his voice had lost its brisk soldier's edge entirely. I've been his beta for 20 years, he said, his shield. His right hand. I have followed that man into 3 wars and I never once let anything get past me to reach him. He dragged a hand down his face, and Soraya saw that the iron of him, the same iron the king wore, had cracked. And underneath it was just a frightened friend who had failed at the one thing he built his life around. And this thing has been eating him alive for 4 years, every single night, in the one place I couldn't follow. He sat across the war table from me 1,000 times and never said a word. I thought he was tired. I thought he was strong. His jaw worked. I couldn't reach him. 20 years, and the one who could was a girl from a mill town he met a month ago. He looked at Soraya, and there was no resentment in it, only a raw and desperate hope. So, whatever you're about to do, whatever it takes, you do it. And you bring him back, because I can't. And it's tearing me apart that I can't. I'll bring him back, Soraya said. She did not know if it was true. She said it anyway, because Orin needed to hear it, and because saying it made her own spine straighten. One way or another, I'm not leaving him in there. That's the only version of tonight I'm willing to have. Marist made a low sound, but Soraya was already looking at the bed, at the slack, peaceful face of the man she had somehow, impossibly come to love in 12 nights and a river reed. And her mind was made up in the way that quiet, useful, invisible people's minds are made up, completely, and without drama, and without any intention of being talked out of it. That night, the last night before the full moon, Soraya did the only thing left to do. She lay down on the enormous bed beside her. Unconscious husband took his hand and made herself sleep, walked willingly toward the dark that had already swallowed him, because Marest had told her the plain truth. He had followed her in, and no one but her could follow him. She had thought it would be hard to sleep. It was terrifyingly easy. The pull was already there, the bond humming between their clasped hands, and she went down into it like a stone into black water. The field was gone. There was only the dark now, and the fog, thick and gray and moving, pressing against her skin like cold hands, smelling of ash and river water and grief. This was not the edge of the place anymore. This was inside it. This was the thing itself, and somewhere in it was Violin. And Soraya walked into the gray with her heart in her throat and her husband's name on her lips, and understood with every step that she had walked into the exact trap she'd cried at him not to walk into. But she'd made a choice. He hadn't. She wasn't here to hold the line. She was here to end it. She found him on his knees. The fog thinned into a gray clearing, and there was Violin. But not the Violin she knew, not the king who filled a doorway and made the air heavy. This man was diminished, hollowed, folded down onto the yielding ground, with his head bowed and his shoulders curved inward, like something had scooped him empty. All the iron gone. All the size of him meaningless here, in the place where the only thing that mattered was what a man believed about himself, in the dark. Violin. She dropped to her knees in front of him, took his face in her hands. His skin was cold. Violin, look at me. I'm here. I came in after you. His eyes found hers, slowly, and they were the most terrible thing she had ever seen. Not frightened, not fighting, peaceful. The peace of a man who has finally stopped resisting a thing he always thought he deserved. You shouldn't be here, he said. No urgency in it, but I'm glad. I get to see the face again. Before what? Before I stay, he said it gently. It's all right, Soraya. It's right that I stay. Look. He turned his head, and she followed his gaze into the gray, and her breath stopped. Hundreds of them. More, figures in the torn colors of soldiers, others in the plain clothes of townsfolk, wolves in human shape with eyes that reflected nothing at all. The lost of the Karth War, every one of them, standing silent at the edge of the clearing and watching their king kneel. And as Soraya watched, one figure came forward out of the mass, closer than the rest. A young woman, small, with gentle eyes, and a pale scrap of cloth clutched in her hands. She had Soraya's face. She had the mark too, the same silver crescent at the corner of the left eye, and seeing it there, on that sorrowful face, Soraya finally understood the whole unbearable architecture of what the goddess had done. Ilza. Someone he'd failed to save. Marked exactly as Soraya was marked, which was why the goddess's words had been, "You have seen it before," and the design was cruel only if you stopped halfway. She had not given Soraya the face of the lost to torment him. She had given it so that the living face wearing the same mark could stand in the dark beside the sorrowful one and be chosen so that the thing that had worn Ilse's features to break him could be answered, at last, by Ilse's features refusing to break. She ran toward our line, Violin said, staring at the young woman. His voice gone to gravel. During the last battle, carrying that cloth, she was trying to surrender, trying to broker peace for the one still hiding in the settlement. And I gave the order to hold, and there was so much noise, so much confusion, and I didn't see her in time. I didn't see her until it was already too late, his hands pressed flat against the wrong soft ground. I stayed with her afterward. She was somebody's daughter. She was trying to stop it, and You could have stopped it, said the young woman, in a voice soft and patient and almost kind. You should have seen me. A better king would have. This is on your hands. No, Soraya said. No, those aren't her words. She'd heard it. The instant it spoke, the phrasing was wrong. For a stranger, too intimate, too precisely aimed. Violin. Those aren't Ilza's words. A better king would have. You should have seen me. Those are yours. That's not the lost accusing you. That's you, in her mouth, saying the thing you've told yourself every night for 4 years. Violin's head came up slightly. The witch never had to build all this. Soraya pressed on, gripping his face harder, feeling the truth of it pour through the bond between them. Marest said it. A blood speaker's curse is a small, spiteful thing. It should have worn away years ago. It didn't because you kept feeding it. Every voice in this fog is yours. You built this place, Violin, and you've been the only one keeping it standing because some part of you decided that Ilse's death was a debt you had to pay forever. Her voice broke. But it isn't a debt. It's a wound. And you don't pay wounds. You survive them. You weren't enough to stop it, she said to him, then forcing the words past the tightness in her throat, saying them slowly so he could not mistake them. You weren't. That's true. No one told you a lie about that. One man in the noise of a battle could not have seen one girl and one pale cloth in time. You were not enough, but no one could have been. That isn't a failing, Violin. It doesn't say what you think it says about you. The fog trembled. I know what it is to believe you deserve the bad thing, Soraya went on, and now she wasn't only speaking to him. When my mother died, I decided somewhere, deep down, that it was my fault, that if I'd been worth more, the world would have been kinder. When I got taken, I decided marked ones deserve to be taken. My whole life I've made myself small and useful and quiet because somewhere, I decided I wasn't allowed to take up room just for being. I know this place, Valen. I've lived in a version of it since I was 9. She pressed her forehead to his. And I'm telling you what I finally had to tell myself. You're allowed to remember them. You're allowed to grieve them until the day you die. But you are not required to stay in the dark with them. You're allowed to put this down. For a long, suspended moment, nothing happened. Then Violin's cold fingers rose, slowly, and closed around her wrist. Not to push her away. To hold on. He turned to the young woman with Soraya's face, and this time when he spoke, his voice did not break. "I'm sorry, Ilsa," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't see you in time. I'm sorry for all of it, for the whole terrible war, for every one of you." His gaze swept the silent crowd. "I would give anything to have done it better. But I have spent 4 years fading slowly to prove I'm sorry, and it hasn't brought a single one of you back. So I'm going to do the harder thing instead." His hand tightened on Soraya's wrist. "I'm going to live. And I'm going to let you rest." The young woman looked at him, and whatever had been wearing her gentle face, the patient, hungry, 4 years clever thing, found that there was suddenly nothing left in Valen for it to hold on to, no guilt to grip, no debt to feed, and it simply let go. Lykel's face softened into something that was only sorrow, only a girl, only a grief laid down at last. She closed her eyes, and she was gone. One by one, all through the gray, the lost turned and dissolved into the fog like breath into cold air. Their voices faded, the clearing brightened, the fog thinned to nothing. And Violin Dovenmark pitched forward into Soraya's arms, shaking as 4 years of unwept grief finally broke open and poured out of him, and she held him in the vanishing dark and whispered into his hair, over and over, "I've got you, I've got you, I've got you," until there was no more fog, and no more dark, and nothing left to hold the line against. They woke in the same breath, in the enormous bed, in the gray light before dawn. Soraya surfaced gasping with Violin's arms already tightening around her, and for a moment, neither of them could speak. They only clutched at each other, wet-faced and trembling, confirming with desperate hands that they were both here, both warm, both out. His heart hammered against her palm, his breathing was ragged, and underneath the fear, singing along the bond between them, was something she had never felt from him before. Quiet. A vast, exhausted, unbroken quiet, like a storm that has finally passed. "You came in after me," he said against her hair wonderingly. "I told you never to. And you walked straight into the dark after me. I say the barbed thing first, and do the reckless thing second." Her voice was wrecked. "You knew what you were marrying." He laughed. A real one, cracked and raw and utterly astonished, the ledger of them ticking over in her chest. And his gray eyes were clear for the first time, since she had met him, clear all the way down, no fog behind them, no lost woman, superimposed over her living face. He looked at the mark, at the corner of her eye. And this time he did not go somewhere else. This time he stayed. "I have been seeing a ghost every time I looked at you," he said quietly. "From the altar until this morning. I married your face because a god told me to, and I hated her a little for it because every time I looked at you, I saw the worst night of my life." He touched the silver crescent with one enormous, gentle finger. "I'm looking at you now. Just you, Soraya of the mill town, who keeps a ledger of my laughs. You think I haven't noticed you counting?" A rough breath. "The goddess didn't give me Ilza's face to punish me. She gave me the one face in all the world that could walk into that place, wearing it and make me choose the living over the lost. That's what I worked out," Soraya whispered. "In the fog, she didn't need a lock or a key or a bride. She needed someone stubborn enough to stand in that place with you and argue. She managed a wet smile. Lucky, for the whole kingdom, she picked an accountant. We're relentless about debts that don't add up. There was a pounding at the door then. Oren, unable to wait another moment, bursting in with Marist close behind, and they stopped short at the sight of the two of them upright and awake and wrapped around each other in the dawnlight. Oren's face did something complicated. Marist's did not. The old healer simply looked at Soraya over the king's shoulder and gave a single slow nod, as though a thing she had feared for 60 years had finally, against all odds, come right. You're awake, Oren managed. You're both of you. The whole palace thinks you're fasting. I told them you were fasting. Then we'll have a very large breakfast, Violen said, and prove you a liar. And Oren made a sound that was half a laugh and half something wetter, and had to turn around and look at the wall for a moment. But it was Marest who said the thing that mattered, the thing that turned the last key. The full moon, she said. It rises whole tonight. Caliph's own night. The deadline she set. You woke with hours to spare, and I do not think that is an accident. She looked between them. She ordered the king to wed the mark before the moon rose full, and bind his line to yours, or watch the dark take Dovenmark. Everyone assumed the dark she meant was the Western Duke, an army, a war. The old woman's clever eyes were bright. It was never an army. The dark she meant was this, the thing in the fog, growing a little every night, that would have taken the king within the year and left the kingdom leaderless before an enemy's blade ever came near it. She didn't send you to prevent a war, she smiled finally, 60 years of doubt falling away from her face. She sent you to save one man from himself. Because a kingdom is only ever as whole as the person holding it up. Soraya looked at Valen, her impossible, haunted, no longer quite so haunted husband, and felt the bond hum warm and gold and complete between them, and understood that the goddess had not been cruel after all. She had been precise. She had looked into the years ahead and seen a good king drowning slowly in his own guilt, and she had reached 200 miles south to a mill town on the Grey River Marne, and found the one small, stubborn, barb-tongued woman who could reach him, and she had given her a face that would get her into the dark, and a spirit that would get them both out. That night, when the moon came, they did not spend it apart. The rite the priestess had botched at the altar was finished at last in the quiet of the king's chambers. No 300 nobles, no silver veil, only the two of them, and the full moon pouring through the window. When Violin drew her to him this time, there was no ghost between them. There was only the warmth of him and her own heart steadying, and the certainty settling over them both that this was chosen and not commanded. The old bond of his kind took hold the way it was meant to, quiet and sure and mutual, and Soraya felt it lock into place in her chest, warm and golden and right, a thread run straight from her heart to his. She felt his startled, wondering breath against her hair as the same thing bloomed in him. The bond flared bright and whole and complete, and for the first time in the history of the strange haunted marriage, a goddess had ordered the Alpha King of Dovenmark and his queen belonged, fully and by choice, to each other. So, Soraya said afterward, tucked against his chest, listening to a heartbeat that was, for once, done hurried. We saved the kingdom by having an argument in a swamp. I want that in the official record. The kingdom was preserved through the queen's refusal to lose a debate. It'll be in the record, Violin said gravely, directly beneath the part where the Alpha King fainted at his own wedding. You did nearly go straight down. In front of everyone, I have decided, he said, drawing her closer as the full moon climbed the sky, that it was the single best decision of my life. Fainting at the sight of you. I do it again tomorrow, and behind his eyes, where 4 years of fog had waited every night to pull him under, there was nothing now but the quiet and the moonlight and the warm gold bond between a haunted king and the woman a goddess had sent to argue him back into the light. The dark did not vanish all at once. That was the truth, Soraya learned in the months that followed, and it was a truer, gentler truth than any story that ended clean. Violin still woke some nights with his heart pounding and Ilsa's name half-formed on his lips. Grief did not evaporate because a man had chosen, once, in a clearing in the fog, to put it down. Healing was not a door that shut. It was a road, and it was long, and some days it doubled back on itself. But he was never alone on it again. Every time he surfaced in the dark, she was there. Not to fix it, not to argue anymore, just to take his hand and listen, while he learned, slowly, patiently, to speak about the war out loud. To say the names of the lost in daylight instead of carrying them alone at night. And night by night, month by month, he learned the thing his body had forgotten in the mountains 4 years before, how to sleep, whole and deep and unafraid, beside someone who had walked into the worst of him and refused to leave him there. The court took longer to soften than he did. A mill-town accountant on the throne of Dovenmark was not what the noble houses had pictured, and the whispers followed Soraya down every corridor for a season. The southern girl, the stranger, the queen with the powdered-over mark. She felt every stare. But Valen's hand was always steady in hers when they walked into a room, and his voice was always sure, and eventually the whispers wore themselves out against the plain evidence of a king who slept, and smiled, and ruled clear-eyed for the first time in living memory. "They'll get used to it," he told her once, holding her in the dark of their chambers. "And if they don't, they can take it up with their king, who is unreasonably fond of his queen." She kept the ledger of his laughs for a while, out of habit, until the number got too large to bother counting. She never did powder over the mark again. The silver crescent at the corner of her eye, the thing her mother had taught her to hide, the thing that had gotten her taken, the thing a goddess had reached across a kingdom to find. She wore it plain now, in the light where anyone could see. It had never been a curse, it had been a summons, and it had called her, the long way round, out of a small, safe life she'd taught herself to be grateful for, and into a large, frightening one she had chosen, with both eyes open. On a morning near the first anniversary of the strangest wedding Dovenmark had ever seen, Soraya woke slowly to pale light through the curtains. Violin was still asleep beside her, deeply, easily, one arm wrapped around her waist, his face smoothed of all its old exhaustion, no field behind his eyes, no fog waiting to pull him under. She watched him breathe for a while, this enormous, gentle man who had nearly fallen down at the sight of her face and had spent every day since proving it was the best fall of his life. Then she settled back against his shoulder and closed her eyes, and, unhaunted, unhurried, unafraid, they slept.